The Cashflow Quadrant by Robert Kiyosaki. Has it aged very well in this just overwhelming abundance of financial books that are coming out in the year of 2020? Or does it fall short by today's standards? Well, stick around to the end of the video, find out. Hello everyone, and welcome to another book review done by Financial Anatomy. I'm your host Elijah, and this is a channel where you can learn how to take control of your financial destiny. And in this video, we're going to be reviewing Robert Kiyosaki's Cashflow Quadrant. It is available on audiobook, on paperback, and also on Kindle. So this is a classic, and there's something to be said about the classics, but we have a bunch of financial books that are coming out nowadays, so does it measure and hold up by today's standards? When I was thinking about how to categorize this book, I don't want to do an overabundance of business books because this is still a personal finance channel. I want to keep it balanced, like 70-30, 70% financial and 30% maybe business. With this one, it's kind of hard to categorize because he talks about business a lot, but he talks about finance a lot. But overall, I would still say it is a book in personal finance. So you might be wondering, Elijah, what's the overview of the book? What is this book about? What am I going to get out of it? Why should I pick it up? Let's get into it. So Robert Kiyosaki's Cashflow Quadrant, it's a new way of thinking for its time. It really introduced something kind of fresh and innovative to the not only the personal finance world, but the business world as a whole. I say the biggest contribution this book has is just introducing that way of thinking. It was just completely foreign. He really dives between the differences between the four quadrants, as he puts it: E, S, B, and I. E stands for employee, S stands for self-employed or small business, B stands for big business, over 500 employees or more, as he puts it, and I stands for investor. He says in his book that there are many books written for people who are in the E and S quadrant, but his books are specifically geared to help people in the B and I quadrants, which is pretty interesting. So throughout the book, he goes into the emotional differences as well as the mindsets of all four quadrants, and he lets you know that one quadrant isn't necessarily better than the other, but you should pick which quadrant you want to be in as opposed to just kind of falling in there as life happens. That's actually a fair point because we don't actually think about stuff like that when it comes to personal finance. In fact, the topic of money, I hate to say it, but it can be the most ignorable aspect of our lives. And when I say ignorable, I'm talking about things just happen unintentionally if you're not careful. And it's just like, oh, I just kind of ended up doing this and I hadn't thought about how it happened. Got to be careful about that. But this book naturally repels that concept, that thought, by letting you know what these are, where you fall, and if you want to be in a certain quadrant, these are what you need to do. So you want to go from E to S, or S to B, or B to I. He really makes it known that there's some emotional differences that need to be swapped, and mindset too. Unfortunately, the minute details of what I said aren't necessarily found in this book. It's very mindset and perspective driven in terms of changing things. And that goes into our next category of book reviewing when we talk about concept versus details. So this book is overly polarized in the concept and not as much in the details. That may alienate some people. He does bring a fresh take on the art of personal finance, making money, and also he gets into investing a little towards the second half of the book. In fact, I didn't mention this, but in terms of financial anatomy, what we're looking at here, this is strictly about income for the most part. The investing part kind of goes into budgeting, but I would put this in the category of income in general. Okay, so you're working on your financial arms. Swinging back to what we were talking about, I would have liked to see more details on how to do some things he's talking about, but he really does stick to that conceptualized way of teaching, and he has a graphic novel sense of teaching where he goes back and forth between stories of him and his rich dad and then telling you and talking to you in the present day. I like that format. That's pretty interesting, but it's like 75% conceptual, 25% details. That will alienate some, so you need to know that going into it. But does the cash flow quadrant actually solve the problem that it was written for. So when we read the full title, Rich Dad's Cashflow Quadrant, Guide to Financial Freedom, does it solve financial freedom? Financial freedom is a very subjective concept, but most people will agree that it is the ability to work when you want to or not to. And he does get into that, don't get me wrong, but what I took away from this book in terms of financial freedom is really finding out what quadrant you want to be in, what quadrant you're currently in, and then mapping out a plan to get there. And you knowing your place in terms of the quadrant kind of will lead you to financial freedom as long as you know that's where you want to be. Because when you're making money in the ways that you want to make them based on these quadrants, that in itself is freedom. And I'm going to share a personal story. It was back when I was working for Amazon. I was listening to the Cashflow Quadrant. I've listened to it at least over 5 times. And he was talking about the differences between employee, self-employed, the quadrants. And he said something that I'm never going to forget. He said that, if you want to be completely balanced, you need to have your hands in at least 2 quadrants. And those 2 quadrants, you got to have one on the left side and one on the right side. And a lot of people think he's strictly always talking about the right side of the quadrant, the B and I. But he specifically said, not in this book, but in other books, in particular, quit your job before you quit your job, if memory serves me correctly. But he got his bones in the S quadrant, and he still has those skill sets to this day. Let's say if his fortune just disappeared all of a sudden, he can still go back to the S quadrant and make money with it. And that really meant a lot to me. He gave a story about this firefighter who he was perfectly happy in the E quadrant, and he worked there for 30 years. He'll be getting his retirement shortly, but he had investments on the side. He is perfectly happy with that. And I came to a realization, if you want to be in the B quadrant, you got to work with people. You got to do a lot of things that he outlines in this book. I decided, you know what? Even though the B quadrant is appealing, that's not actually what I want. The quadrants that I actually emotionally respond to is the S quadrant and the I quadrant. So the way of success for me is to make a lot of money in the S quadrant and invest. And it's really that simple. Obviously, investments can take different forms, but yeah, that's subjective. But I came to that conclusion, and that was powerful in, I'll say, my arc moving forward when it came to finances. So does it solve the, I guess it wasn't necessarily a problem, but does it deliver on its promise of a guide to financial freedom? I'm going to say yes, he does. So in terms of the 6 personalities, who's this book for? You know what? I'm going to be honest. This is one of the few exceptions where I'm going to say all people should read it in terms of personalities. So you got 6 personalities: the builder, the sniper, the king of the hill, the fame seeker, the preserver, and the conservative, out of Financial Anatomy. And I say all should read it for a simple fact that there's a lot of outliers in terms of these quadrants. So if you're a builder and you want to be in the B quadrant, you're going to get something good out of here. Let's say you're a builder, you want to be in the I quadrant, there's something here for you. Let's say you're a sniper, you want to be in the S quadrant, there's something here for you. You can lay this on top of your native personality, and it will give a lot of perspective. So I say that all personalities should read it. It's not necessarily biased towards a certain one. Since we're talking about income, what ways of making money are you going to find in here? We're not going to find anything hardly about being an employee, okay? And you're going to find a lot about entrepreneurship. You're going to find a decent amount about investing. That's towards the second half of the book, and it's more meant to be an introduction. Here's if I remember right, the next book in the series of the Rich Dad brand is a Rich Dad's Guide to Investing. So you can tell he's laying the foundation for that in terms of investing. But there is some decent advice on investing in here. So it is for investors. It's not so much for people who want to get referral or affiliate marketing. And he doesn't really talk about being a contractor in any way. So there's nothing for that type of income. But if you're an entrepreneur or investor or looking to go that direction, this book is for you. So giving my final thoughts, I'm going to give Robert Kiyosaki's Cashflow Quadrant a 9 out of 10. The reason I'm giving it a 9 out of 10, not like necessarily a perfect score, is because it does need more details by today's standards. The conceptual financial book thing, it was popular 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, but this time around, people, myself included, are demanding more actionable advice. Show me directly how to get X, Y, Z. And they're already getting the concept down. They want actual actionable advice, which will require you to go into details. So I got to take a point off of that. And that aside, I do recommend this book. That does it for this book review. Stay tuned for the next review we'll be doing, which will be going into one of my favorite financial books, Alpha Money Strategies, written by Alpha Male Strategies. I will catch y'all in the next review. Don't forget to get out there and take control of your financial destiny. If there's a book you want to see reviewed, hey, all you need to do is be a subscriber to the channel or be on the Financial Anatomy email list, and you can submit it in the comments in the link below. I'll catch y'all in the next video.